Well, hey, everyone. Thanks so much for joining today. This is TAM Lab number 103, using vSphere tags and vRealize operations. And we have Brian here today, and he's going to walk us through the session today. So Brian, with that, I'll go ahead and stop the share and hand it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Bill. Alrighty, so we're focusing on vSphere tags. In this case, tags have already been deployed. This started as a customer ask. I kind of recreated it in the lab so that we could work on it kind of independently. But the idea is that tags already exist in the environment, and they're used to control backup schedules. So I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on talking about tagging strategy and such like that, but I do want to show a few of vSphere tag things. But once we cover vSphere tags kind of at a high level, we'll jump over to vROps and we'll use vROps to kind of make use of some of those tags. The first example will be to create a fairly simple dashboard widget that will show us VMs that do not have a backup tag, right? So in most cases, customer would have some sort of backup job that would already be configured to look for VMs with no tag to give them some sort of minimal protection, but it may not be the right time or retention policy or whatnot that's tied to that tag. So as a good practice, the customer would want to have a specific tag on something. And so we'll create a view where we can see all of those VMs that do not have those tags so that they can be fixed. And then after that, we'll work through creating an alert definition so that we can actually kind of surface that information about the VM not having a tag on the virtual machine itself. So if some sort of application owner or something is looking at the VM, they're aware of that in the context they're in, without having to jump over to something like this dashboard that shows the things that aren't being backed up. And then, finally, and we'll work through creating a dashboard to help visualize, the quantity of VMs that are being backed up by individual tags, and that'll involve some custom groups and group types, creating views, creating dashboards. So it'll get a little bit deeper, but we'll try and walk through this in a pretty straightforward way so that it's not overwhelming there at the end. And then just, I guess, a quick disclaimer, some of this is already done in the lab. We'll walk through how to do it, but just from a timing perspective and some of the things that we're going to be creating, once you create them in vROps, you may have to wait, 5-10 minutes before the object is, populated, with some of those custom groups at the end. So in this case, they've already been pre-created, but we'll still walk through that process of creating them. But we'll use ones that have been pre-created. All right, so the first thing, we need to have a kind of a general understanding of tags, right? And so I've got a vCenter here that's open that we're looking at, and we're looking at one specific VM. And if we scroll through there, hit the wrong button, sorry about that. Side button on the mouse here. There's a section on tags here where we can assign tags to this object, and this is really kind of a what we'd call maybe a multiple choice kind of an attribute that we can assign to a VM. They differ from custom attributes, right? Custom attributes are kind of free-form text. We'll end up having these attributes in here, and we can edit them, and we can type anything in here. So kind of short answer, if you will, from a test question analogy, where these are more multiple choice. So we've got two of them assigned to this VM. As you can see, there are a few more tag categories that haven't been assigned. So we could use those if we wanted to. But if we jump over to tags and custom attributes, like I said, these are multiple choice type questions. The category is basically the question, right? So we have VM backup is a category that already existed in customer environment, and then tags are the individual answers to that multiple choice question about VM backup. So if we're looking at ones that are specifically VM backup, and we'll jump over to this next page. I must have missed them here because there should be a handful of them. Maybe I wouldn't look. Here we go. Yeah, I just wasn't looking close enough. So I have a handful of tags that are in this category, and I've got the category created such that only one tag from this category can be assigned to any VM. When you create your category, that's actually a decision that you can make. So if we edit this category, you can say how many tags can be assigned to an object. In my case, I said each VM can only have a tag. We could have said that it has many tags, but for what I'm trying to do, one tag seemed appropriate. And then I've got it limited to only virtual machines, right? Because those are the objects that we're going to back up, right? Like this third-party backup products typically don't back up ESX hosts; they're backing up the individual virtual machines. So we've set it so that these tags can only be applied to objects that are virtual machines. All right, so I think that is kind of the level set on tags that I wanted to cover. But more specifically, if we pick one of those tags and we drill into it, we can see that there are a number of VMs that are associated with that tag. And in this case, 0500, that's kind of a timestamp, right? So 5 a.m. Daily backup schedule, IND being Indianapolis. So that's where I'm based. So, in this fashion, right, the tag actually has kind of three pieces of data in it, right? It's got a time that the backup starts. It has the frequency of the backup, and then where the backup storage is. And this is similar to a customer scenario that we were recreating. And as you can see here, this tag has just a handful of VMs that are associated with it. It's only 8. And in this case, I've got vCenter, 2 vCenters in enhanced linked mode. So these tags do get replicated through that ELM domain. And I can see that one tag is used by VMs in both vCenter 1 and vCenter 2. So relatively straightforward. This this is helpful if you're trying to figure out how many VMs are starting their backups at 5 a.m. We could come here and look at that, and we know that it is 8 VMs. So pretty easy. The problem is, if we have multiple vCenters that are maybe detached from each other, right, not in the same enhanced link mode domain or different sites or different, whatever, it is possible that I could use those same tags and have the same kind of tagging policy set up in my backup software to, look for VMs with this same tag that exist anywhere, right, in any vCenter. But the problem is, now I've got 23 more VMs that have the same tag, and I'd have to do, either automate this myself through some sort of script or some mental gymnastics to figure out which VMs everywhere have a certain tag, and then compare that to a list of all of the VMs that exist to find the ones that aren't being backed up or don't have a tag, right? And that becomes kind of complicated. And if it's a script, let's say that's running daily or something, and the backup team gets it and they're like, oh yeah, I fixed some of these, right? It was a long list, I fixed some of them, but I don't remember which ones I fixed. And then the next day they get the email again and they're like, oh yeah, I still got 3 left. And they'll eventually work their way through that list and get them all fixed up. But what my customer was hoping for was a way, to kind of provide some self-service to that backup team so that they could fix stuff and then, rerun that script or do something to get an updated list. And vROps seemed like a fitting, solution. It's already got all of this inventory information. So we set off, kind of as step 1 to just create a very simple widget that would show us all of the VMs that had no backup tag. And we learned a couple things along the way and just wanted to pass those along in this TAM Lab. So we'll jump over to vROps here, and we've got a dashboard that's already been created. And this is just kind of like a daily report, kind of a dashboard. And, it's checking a handful of things, VMs with old snapshots and whatnot. And we added this widget in, kind of in this context of stuff that ops folks would do on a regular basis, to look for VMs without a backup tag. So it's definitely possible here. We've got the information. But what we're going to do is just create a new dashboard, kind of here on the call to kind of step through how that was done. So first thing we're going to do, create a new dashboard. We'll call this TAM Lab 103 backups or something, because we're creative and that's what this session is. So we're going to drag an object list in. That's the kind of first choice here on the page. So that kind of makes sense. We'll start with it. I was talking with a few other TAMs about, whether an object list or a custom view would be a more appropriate widget here. And I think what we kind of decided amongst ourselves is it doesn't really matter for the purposes of what we're building. And this one is just a touch easier to demo. So that's why we're starting here, not starting with a view. So if that's a question you have and you have a strong opinion on it one way or another, I'd be super interested in hearing it. What we'll do is we'll come into this this object list and we'll edit it up. We'll do just like we saw on that previous dashboard. We'll call it VMs without backup tag or something similar to that. And we're going to say that this widget on this dashboard is a self-provider, which means we're going to define kind of in the widget itself where the data comes from, and we're not going to be driving it from an interaction with another widget. So we just start here at the top and kind of work our way through these. Right, so output filter, that's the first one that's got stuff that's exciting to us. I'm going to kind of do two filters in here. The first one will be an object type virtual machine, right? Because we already said that this is going to be VMs with no backup tag. So we're going to just start with scrolling through this list, finding virtual machine. Boom. So we got 162 VMs in here. Then we'll come over here and we'll do some advanced criteria. We'll look at virtual machine related properties here. And we'll come in this list and we'll say that the property summary vSphere tag does not contain VM backup. So, from looking at this earlier, right, we know that our tag category that we're using in here, we'll just click on one of these VMs, right, because it'll show us this mapping here. The tag VM backup, in this case is assigned 0500 daily IND. So VM backup is the tag category. We're going to have that tag category if we have a tag associated with it. If there were no tag assigned to this VM from that category, that text wouldn't appear in this tag option. So we're going to just say if it doesn't have VM backup in it, we think that's a problem. We're going to put that in our list. Then we've got the ability.
Can I ask real quick? When you went to properties, there was actually an option to choose tag, but you went with properties. Why did you do that?
So this is new. This was introduced in, I want to say 8.3, 8.4, something like that. So a very recent version of vROps. It hasn't always been there. So I went with the one, I was running a newer version than my customer at the time. So I went with the legacy property that's been here for a little bit longer.
Okay, it is the same.
It should work identical. I just didn't test with it.
Okay, thank you. That was all.
Yeah, great question. But we can, while we're looking at this, we can throw some other, properties in here that might be, interesting to see when we're looking, at a VM that's not being backed up or doesn't have a backup tag, right? We may want to see that vSphere tag, like what tags does it have? We may want to know, let's see here, something like disk space, or actually, I think it's configuration, hardware, disk space, right? So if we're going to back up a VM, we probably want to know how big it is. And then we might want to know other tags that it has, like if it's got a tag that says it's production or something. So we'll pick both of those and we'll add that into this list as other properties we're interested in. And then maybe we'll even come in here and instead of having the column called, summary vSphere tag, we'll call it existing tags. And we'll just update that kind of friendly label. And instead of configuration hardware, disk space gigabytes, we'll just say disk space GB, something like that. All right, so we did, we created our view, we selected the criteria for our object list. But we've got all these columns in here we don't really need. So, the easy way is just to check this little thing here in the bottom left and come through and unselect everything except name, because some of these, that it's a vCenter VM that's monitored by the vSphere policy. That's not super relevant or going to change very often. So we're just going to uncheck all of that data because that's not super important for our purposes. But you can see we've got 64 VMs in here, right? And that's quite a few. Some of them, though, as we start looking at this list, are CP templates, CP replicas, right? So those are virtual machines that are coming in from my instant clone process on a Horizon environment that's also monitored by this vROps instance, and those aren't super important to me. I'm not going to be backing those up, so I don't really care that they don't have a vSphere tag. I'm probably not going to add one, so I probably want to exclude those from my list. And then also looking through here, I see a handful of templates, I'm probably not going to back those up either. I'm going to go back to edit this widget here, and we'll go into some of our filtering under advanced. And we're just going to add some additional criteria here. So we'll say, and let's see, be a property, summary, configuration, VM template is false, right? So we'll exclude all of the templates because we said we didn't really care about those. And we'll say relationship. No, actually, no. Under summary, I think there's a parent data center. I could have probably done relationship, but what I wanted to do was exclude stuff that was under a cluster. So I'm just going to say if the parent data center is my EUC data center, that's something that I want to exclude as well. And we'll save that. And there's one other thing that we're going to find once we start. Well, actually, do you see what I did there? That was not right. I said is EUC, and I wanted to say is not EUC because I want to exclude that. I didn't catch that. But then, we've got a list here. We're getting a little bit closer. This looks good. I can sort by name here, and if I start scrolling through here, I see some of these vCLS VMs, right? So these are new to vSphere 7. It's related to clustering. I'm probably not going to back those up either. So I don't really want to see those in my list. So I'm going to come back to this again. We'll just part of this is knowing where these buttons are, and then part of it is just kind of looking at the data and making changes on the fly to get to where we want to be. So we could do this a handful of different ways, but I'm just going to say the object name does not contain vCLS in a space because that's what the naming convention kind of looked like, right? There were vCLS space and then open parenthesis and end, a number and end parenthesis. So I'll just say it does not contain vCLS space. I think that'll give us a fairly short list here of things that we do care about. So I'm going to go ahead and save this because I think this is what we were hoping for, right? And so if my backup team wanted to come in here and check these on a regular basis or whatnot, vROps is going to be collecting inventory information from my environment every 5 minutes. And so once they get a tag applied to something, within 5 minutes or so, it should disappear from this list. And so I actually created a TAM Lab 103 VM in advance that has this problem on it, right? And it has no tag. One of the cool things we can do with this this widget here is just once we pick an object, there's a list of actions that we can perform. And one of them is to open the VM and the web client. So we'll go ahead and push that button. I already logged into vCenter beforehand, right? So I'm already logged in. It's just going to take me to the inventory where that VM lives, and I can come in here and assign some sort of backup tag. And like I said, in 5 minutes or so, this list should drop down to about 15 VMs. Any questions or comments on what we built so far?
I do. A quick question. Would it be possible or reasonable to set up an alert, or would this even trigger an alert? Like if maybe something showed up in this list?
Yeah, you read my mind, because that is part 2 of this session. So part 2 is definitely going to be creating an alert, and instead of doing like if something shows up in this list, sending an email, what we're actually going to do is create a real alert that's going to show up on a virtual machine. So like, let's go look, we started kind of out when we were in the vSphere console of looking at this domain controller VM. And so we'll jump right into it. We have these active alerts that are associated to the VM, and this domain controller is currently in a healthy state, so we have no active alerts. But if we would go to that dashboard we just created, let's pick a VM that's not, here, this is a perfect one. Pick a VM that's not the one that we just fixed, because it's going to eventually fall off that list. You can see in this case, the VM does have an alert that requires immediate action. And if I dig into it and start looking at it, it's going to say that there's a virtual machine that does not have a backup tag. So that's what we're going to create, is this alert that's on the VM. And then, if we wanted to, we could actually say, if this alert gets triggered, we want to, this is vROps 8.4. We have a lot more options on what we do with that. We could post it to Slack, for example, or we could raise a ticket in ServiceNow, or we could send an email. Some of those things are definitely options. So we'll go ahead and start working on recreating that. You can see we have a handful of alerts already in here from various things. But we're going to start, kind of at the end of the list, right? Because this is one of those things, everything kind of builds on top of something. I don't really plan on starting until we get here really to recommendations, but did want to take a second to kind of talk to some of these. So payload templates is where we could put something in like a thing that would be able to post to Teams, for example, or some sort of custom API that we have that accepts some webhooks. We could create a template that says, for this webhook, we want you to send the data in this format. And then notifications would be, kind of rules that says, if this criteria is met, do something. And the notification, like I said, could be, post to Slack, send an email, write to a log file. I think send an SNMP trap is in there. So we can do a lot of things with notifications. We can take actions, and actions are super cool, because like you can actually, there's a thing that exists, I don't have it in this lab, but where you can actually tie vROps to VRO, and you could say, if this alert condition is satisfied, then call out and run this VRO workflow. But there's some in here. We could create something in theory. If we said, I've got a VM with old snapshots on it, I want once the snapshots are of a certain age, I want an action to trigger to delete snapshots. And we can say if that recommendation is applied, then we would come in here and do one of these actions to that VM. But like I said, recommendations is kind of where I was planning on starting this stuff. And I think I already have a recommendation. Yeah, we'll create one, whatever, it's super easy. So recommendation, just one big text box, right? So we'll put in here something to the effect of, I'll put my initials and then custom, so that we know that this is something added after. We'll even put TAM Lab in case we start searching for it, we'll find it. But we'll put a note, VMs should have backup tags. We'll keep it kind of simple so that you're not just watching me type here. But for example, if a customer has some sort of fancy, let's say they're not using ServiceNow, or their ticketing system doesn't have the ability to post into it super easily through an API. But let's say they have some sort of email address that if you email it, it cuts a ticket. I've got a customer that does that. I think VMware has some of that stuff internally where if we need help with something, if there's an alias we can email to, and that'll spawn a ticket. But some of those tickets have to have some sort of crafty formatting in them. For example, like some sort of routing rule, for example, that says that if you see something with this text in it, the category of the ticket should be backup, and it should be assigned to this team, and it should have like a severity 3 kind of ticket category or something like that. And so if it has some sort of rule, you could type that that instruction, right? Let's say it's some special characters, you do like rule 1 2 3 or whatever, and you close the bracket or something. We could put that text in this recommendation, so when it fires and sends an email, for example, right, we won't actually set up the email in here, but if it did, that email would contain this text, and then the mailbox would understand what to do with it. Actions are optional. The reason I started at the bottom of this list and started working upwards is if you had some sort of action, it would be something that you would pick from here. So if I had the VRO integration set up, VRO would be an adapter type, and then I could see a list of things that VRO would support. But I don't have an action. It's optional anyway, so I'm not going to fill one in. But we'll just put our TAM Lab 103 text in here, because we'll need to find it again in a second, and it helps if we know what to search for. So we've got a recommendation. This is what's going to show up in the alert of appropriate next steps would be to do whatever we typed in our description here. So then we're going to create some symptom definitions. And I actually created these in advance, again, because a lot of it's just a bit of typing and whatnot. But if you recall, when we went back to that first object list that we created, where we put all of our filtering in, there were 4 criteria we used. The VM not having a backup tag was for sure an important piece of it, but we also wanted some logic in there to exclude stuff from the VDI data center, our template VMs, and anything that had VCLS in the name. So I created those all as kind of separate symptom definitions. And then later on, when we create this alert definition, we'll actually stitch these together and say that it needs to have all of these in it. There's other ways in vROps that you can actually achieve this. You don't have to like make the alert criteria so advanced. That there's a way that you could create a custom policy and say the custom policy applies to, for example, just VMs that match this criteria, and then you would create your alert that says it triggers for any VM that's in this policy. Policies are something I don't know. I waffle on whether you should avoid them or whether you should lean into them. They're somewhat complex, and one object can only be in one policy, so you really have to have a pretty solid plan when you start going down that policy route. For what we're doing here, this alert's not really going to be super complicated. It's only 4 criteria, but it's very flexible, right? We could put almost any criteria in here we want, and really narrow that alert down to stuff that we truly care about. And we could even, we had that example earlier of there are other tag categories in this environment. One might be, what kind of environment is this? Is it dev, production, QA? We could actually put some additional criteria in here that, we only trigger this alert if it's a production VM. If it's dev VM, we exclude it. But it's kind of, limitless flexibility going down this route with, with multiple criteria. It just becomes a little bit more kind of admin overhead on setting it up initially. But once it's set up, it should be good, unless something kind of drastic changes in the environment, then we need to revisit it. But I did, these are created in advance. I did kind of want to walk through how to create one, because it is relatively straightforward, right? It's going to be very similar to that criteria we used earlier. So we're going to pick virtual machine type. And we're going to look at properties, and then under summary we had the vSphere tag, which is what we were looking at before. So we'll just drag that over here. We name the symptom. So in our previous example, we called it TAM Lab dash something, and we'll say VM without backup tag. And so we'll say property, this vSphere tag, does not contain VM backup. And then it says trigger, how critical is this? Is this just info? Is it warning? I don't know. There's only 4 choices. It's not info, right? Because I do want to take action with this. It's not critical. Like we don't need to stop the presses to fix this. So I just tagged it as immediate. You can choose anything you want in here. If you recall the previous screenshot, right, where the screen where the 4 rules were pre-created, only one of them was immediate, and then the other 3, like VCLS in the name, EUC data center, I just left those as info, right? Because it is just a piece of information, no action required. It's not good or bad. It's just a criteria we were using to exclude things from showing up in this alert. So those are info in my case, and then this one about the VM not having a tag, it's going to call it requiring immediate action. And when we create this, actual alert, we can either say the alert itself has a different kind of criticality, or we can say use the highest one from the list of things that we provided, right? So let's say that we had 5 criteria, and one of them was critical and 2 of them were immediate, and one of them was just a warning, right? Like we were checking 5 different things, but we wanted a little bit different flexibility over how important responding to something was. The alert is actually going to pick the highest criticality of the list. So in this case, where I've got 3 infos, 1 immediate, it's going to say, yeah, that's immediate, right? As long as one of these was immediate, that's what's triggering. Advanced settings, those are always fun to dig into. So wait cycle, this is one that we're actually going to use. Right, so we're talking about backup tags, and in this case, the customer has a process that's going to deploy VMs for them, like a service catalog kind of thing. In their case, it happens to be VRA, but it could be any product that assigns tags to virtual machines. But in their case, the tag doesn't get assigned when the VM gets created. It gets assigned closer toward the end of the process. That process typically takes 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes, depending on what all boxes somebody checked in the provisioning of this VM. And so vROps is checking every 5 minutes. So you can imagine a scenario where a VM got deployed and it was in the process of being built, but vROps found it before it had a vSphere tag on it. Didn't mean a vSphere tag wasn't coming. It just vROps checks more often, or checks more frequently than it takes to provision a VM. So what we can do here, we know that kind of on the high end, provisioning this VM with all the associated services and whatnot takes 20 minutes. And we know, it's collecting every 5 minutes. So we could say that's about 4 cycles that we'd want to wait. We can maybe round up to 5 or even 6, right? Because we don't want this alert to trigger and somebody to get a ticket that they have to go respond to. And by the time they respond to it, it's already kind of fixed, right? So we could say wait 6 cycles. So if a VM was created and after 6 cycles, 30 minutes, it doesn't have a tag, then it's a problem. So in our case, I put that on our VM because we really want to make sure that if we're going to trigger an alert, it is something that is actionable and worthwhile to go investigate. And so here is a good place to make that happen. And I'll say cancel, right, because these already exist, but you can see it's an immediate action. The other 3 are info. It's the same criteria we used on that object list before. All right, so all of that is building up to this kind of last bullet here in the configuration of our alert. All right, so I guess I hit a button but didn't mention I was going to hit it. So we'll back up one screen here. So this is a list of all the alert definitions that exist in my environment. And so I'm going to add a new one. And we'll call this something like TAM Lab 103 VM no backup tag alert. And this is going to apply to virtual machines again, right? Because those are the things that we're backing up. Here are some advanced settings as well. We could do a wait cycle here. We did it in our symptom definition. So that symptom definition is the one that's going to win, unless I put something here that's higher, right? So the symptom's not going to trigger unless that VM has been created for over 30 minutes and doesn't have a tag. So it's going to take that 30 minutes. So I'm not going to do a wait cycle here, though, I think the piece that's important, right? Because we already have the wait cycle on our symptom, so there's no reason to look at it, do 2 wait cycles. We'll just do the one. Impact, we've got health, risk, and efficiency. I'm going to say that this is kind of maybe a risk kind of a thing. Going to say that it's symptom based. So earlier when I said I've got these events that have some are info, some are intermediate. If I say symptom based, it's going to pick the highest of the symptoms that are going to be part of this alert. If I wanted to, I could say that this alert by itself is critical, regardless of the symptoms it contains. So like this gives us a little bit of control over kind of changing this on the fly instead of having to go back through each symptom and figure out, which symptom is the critical one. We could just say that this alert by itself, even if the highest severity thing of all of the symptoms was info, we could say if 12 pieces of info combined equal true, then this is a critical alert. So that it's kind of the chance to override it. I leave it symptom based. Symptom based is going to trigger it to be immediate because the highest severity of the 4 criteria we're going to use is immediate. And then the last choice we get to pick for categorizing this is the alert type and subtype. That's something that we could see back on that previous UI before I jumped over here. What I found from kind of messing with this with someone else the other day, the administrative and let's see, which one was it? Administrative and Skyline ones, I would steer clear of picking those on a custom alert. So administrative are typically things that are related to administration of vROps, like not necessarily like I'm an admin of the vSphere infrastructure, so like this is an admin thing. So I wouldn't use this for something custom unless it was something custom that was talking about vROps health itself. And then Skyline, obviously this isn't coming from Skyline, so there's no reason for me to pick that. But if I come back up here and I say that this is like an application configuration kind of issue, or whatever. I guess VMs are part of an application stack, and it would be the kind of configuration of that application that's something, right? I don't know. This is kind of a weird setting, categorizing these things, because like I don't know where backups really fit in these, so it's kind of dealer's choice. That's something you could kind of come in and tweak after the fact, but we're going to roll with application configuration. Then here is where we start stitching those symptoms together to kind of make something a little bit more meaningful. And we named ours all starting with TAM Lab, which was key so that we could search that list because that list had a lot of symptoms in it. But this just makes it a little bit easier to find what we're looking at. And we know part of this is going to be VM doesn't have a backup tag. That's kind of the most important. That's why we created this. So I'm going to put that one first, right? Because that is most important to me. And so we've got the ability to take some of these other criteria, and we can either add them into the same kind of rule, or we could add them into like a new rule and have multiple rules. And what's kind of amazingly flexible about this is like each of these boxes has its own kind of, is this an and or an or? And then kind of the rule itself has that. So I could actually say if these two things and this are true, or I could make this an or, and then the overall thing an and. You can kind of mess with this to make it whatever you want. For what we're doing here, right, this is actually really only kind of one rule. Let me make sure I get the right ones in here. So what we're going to say, if all of these are true, right? Because we really want all three of these things to kind of add up in order for this alert to trigger, right? This is that same kind of filtering criteria we used initially on that object list, but we want it to not contain VM backup and not be the EUC data center and not be a template and not contain VCLS. So these are kind of combined, all of the criteria. It has to meet all of this stuff. And so for what we're doing, we can do this in kind of one kind of rule set definition or symptom set definition, and just use the all, which is kind of the and operator. So yeah, we got all our criteria defined in this alert. And then we'll come over here to recommendations, and we've got that text that we came up with. This is going to be what we would recommend if all three of these things are true. And if we were, well, we'll get to the end here, but if we were going to send an email, this would be the part of the text of that email. All right, so we got our one recommendation associated with our set of 4 symptoms, and then the next thing is which policy do we want this to be enabled in? And like I said, I like to keep things kind of tidy with just one policy, so I only have one policy, which makes choosing which one I want to enable it in very, very easy, because I just check the only box that I have. All right, and then here is where if we already had a notification set up, we could just pick that notification, and when this alert criteria would be triggered, it would send an email, it would post to Slack. I think I have one in here that actually posts to Slack. Again, this UI is much improved. If you've ever tried to create this, like in a previous version of vROps, it was much, much harder. You actually had to kind of go stitch all these pieces together. This wizard on creating an alert definition kind of brings all of the bits together. The way it used to be, you'd create a notification kind of after the fact, after you already had the alert, or at least that's how I would always do it. So like my alert names were kind of tied to what it was doing. Like this was for snapshots. I guess probably a more generic method of building these notification, naming conventions and whatnot would probably be better going forward. But anyway, this is what we got right now. So I'm going to use the thing that sends snapshot notifications to Slack, and I'm going to say if this happens, we're going to trigger this action. Could be open a ticket in ServiceNow. Could be send an email to a mailbox that creates a ticket. Whatever, and you could check multiple ones if you wanted. So we're going to create that alert, and like I said, the way that this was created, it could take some time for that alert to actually trigger, which is part of the reason why we've got that kind of pre-created. We'll come in here and we'll say TAM Lab, and we'll look at older events, because here are it's 15 VMs that don't have a backup tag. If you recall, that dashboard we created originally had 16 VMs. We went in and added a tag to one. While we've been talking, vROps has collected that, and it's like, yep, you've for sure got that tag now. So it fell off the list. So we only have these 15 VMs that still have an alert. And typically, like I mentioned, this customer has a very rigid process where orchestration is deploying these VMs. So it's very rare for something to not have a tag, right? A backup tag. When you start looking at this list, you're like, oh yeah, this is somebody doing something. I was testing. It says delete me. I should probably just delete that VM. Here is where I went from vCenter 6.7 to 7.0, and as part of that upgrade process, that's kind of an uncommon, well, I wouldn't say uncommon workflow, right? We're all familiar with it and we've seen customers do it. But as far as, like the standardization that the customer has, this isn't something that runs through, their orchestration platform. This is kind of an out of band thing. And so, we could go into our inventory, we could see what the 6.7 version of this VM had and apply the tag to the 7.0 version. Or, we could say, oh, this is a vCenter, right? So we want to move to the file-based backup. And just put a tag on this VM that says it's excluded from backups, right? For example, right? And that's something I'm going to just go do real quick here, because if we have a VM that doesn't need to be backed up, we don't want to trigger an alert, open a ticket, have a thing in the UI that you always have to look at. We would really want to come into this VM and have some sort of, I'm going to filter this list to make it easier to see, right? We would want to have some sort of tag that gets assigned to it that just says this VM is intentionally excluded. So we'll go ahead and assign that to it, right? And that's more of just kind of a tag mechanics thing. It makes sense to, if you're going to exclude something, you probably want to have that defined. Probably another thing, and it's not set up in this environment, but we talked about tags being multiple choice questions and custom attributes being short answer. It might make sense to have a short answer question about why is this VM excluded, and that you could use vROps to create another widget that's saying, show me everything that has an excluded tag, but doesn't have an excluded reason, from a custom attribute, because vROps is aware of those custom attributes. So there are a lot of options and additional flexibility that you could kind of use what we've built so far to kind of understand a little bit better. All right, let's see. I see there's a question in Q&A here. Could this be done with public cloud instances based on tagging as well? Any gotchas? That's a good question. I'm assuming it probably could, right? Because public cloud support tags. I don't know. We'd have to obviously tweak the dashboard, right? Because when we created those dashboards, we said that this applies to virtual machine objects. And I think here, if we bounce back over here, we'll go back to our dashboard. We'll make a new dashboard here real quick, or a new widget on our existing dashboard. Because I want to say that, like, and we could probably do this together or something. I want to say like Azure VM or something is like a different object type. So if we come in here and look at object types, I think like there's like an Azure virtual machine. Okay, be alphabetical here, yeah. So Azure virtual machine, right? I don't have any. I would assume that vROps, if you've got this tied into Azure, right, it's going to be pulling in properties associated with it. It would likely be a different property. So we would have to do something. I think you could scale this, but I think it would be a separate rule or something. It's probably where back in our symptom definition, for example, that kind of second thing that we covered, we would have one symptom definition set that's looking at vSphere virtual machines, and then a second one that's looking at Azure VMs, and then we could have them trigger the same alert based on backups, but it would be slightly different criteria for each of them. Alternatively, we could just do it as two separate alerts, right? So that we could have, if it's this first set of symptoms for vSphere VMs, this is the process for fixing it, right? Maybe you talk to your vSphere admins, and then if it's an Azure one, the recommendation would be, talk to your Azure team, for example. While we were talking, I did see a Slack notification here. So let me, just for grins, since we did check that box that said if the alert triggers, we want to send stuff to Slack. And this could use a little bit of tweaking. I didn't tweak it very much, so it kind of has a little bit of extra gibberish in here, but I got a handful of new messages because we triggered a handful of different alerts, but it gives me the details about TAM Lab 103, VMs no backup tag, and you can see that happened at 11:57. It's currently at 11:57 local time here. So it tracks, right? This isn't some smoke and mirrors that I pulled on you. It actually, vROps did kind of webhook out here into Slack and post this for me. And it gives me a link to the alert. You can see it's got the IP address of my vROps instance as opposed to the name. That can be fixed in in vROps advanced settings, you can specify like a load balancer address or whatever, and that's what would show up in the alert text. I just don't have it defined because it's, I don't know, IP typically always works, and name resolution sometimes flakes out, right? It's a home lab, right? So it's not, in the real world, you wouldn't have to worry about that.
Brian, again, thank you. Thank you so much for the session. Again, we appreciate all the effort and this fantastic session. And thank you to everybody else for joining. We'll see you at the next TAM Lab.
Great. Thanks.